Welcome to the Audrey Hall Show. I'm your host, Audrey Hall, and today's program could change your life or the life of someone you care about who struggles to lose weight. This entire hour features an in-depth discussion with two of the top doctors in Massachusetts who specialize in treating obesity. Why is it so hard to lose weight and keep it off? How do you go about comparing and deciding between all the programs, medications, and treatments? How does dieting or medical treatment options for weight loss impact health in both the short term and further down the road for life? Today, our program is meant to be informative. It's not intended to guide or influence medical choices or to give medical advice, but it is intended to provide information about some of the options that exist. And anyone seeking guidance on weight loss should talk to a doctor first for professional advice before taking any medicines or pursuing any treatment for weight loss. I am honored today to have Dr. Angela Fitch joining me as a returning guest, along with first-time guest Dr. Laura Doyon. Dr. Angela Fitch is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Knownwell, a whole health weight loss clinic in Needham, Massachusetts that takes a comprehensive whole person approach to weight loss and healthcare. Dr. Fitch is also the current past president of the Obesity Medicine Association, the former associate director of the Mass General Hospital Weight Center, and faculty at the Harvard Medical School. She is board certified in obesity medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics, specializing in adult and pediatric obesity treatment and prevention. Dr. Laura Doyon is specialty trained in laparoscopic, minimally invasive surgery for weight loss and upper digestive disorders, and she practices at the Emerson Center for Weight Loss in Concord, Massachusetts. Dr. Doyon received Boston Magazine's Top Doctors Award in 2021, 22, and 23, and she was the first bariatric surgeon in Massachusetts and one of just a few in New England to be dual boarded by the American Board of Obesity Medicine, which designates medical weight loss practitioners. She's an active member of the American Society of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery and Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. Welcome and thank you both for taking the time to be here for this discussion. I'm so glad I was able to get all those credentials out because you've worked really hard for them and you come here so well qualified and experienced to talk about this very important topic. Dr. Fitch, you're back for the second time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's a topic that has generated so much interest, not just here, but everywhere in the world with the obesity epidemic. And why do you think that this is in epidemic proportions in the United States? What do you think are the contributing factors?
So Audrey, it's really complicated, right? It's a disease like any other disease, which means there's a lot of factors that are involved, right? Anytime we have a disease, there's a lot of biology, right, that's involved, and genetics and history there on the human side. And then there's our environment that we live in, right? Our environment has become what we call obesogenic, meaning the things in our environment don't necessarily by nature make us healthy by default. So we're constantly trying to, fight against that. And normally human beings or beings in general, right, they live in their environments, right? You don't ask them to live opposite their environment. You ask them to live into their environment. That's what they do.
Right.
Animals, you put them, they're in the wild, they live in their environment.
Even as it changes, they are asked to adapt.
You move them to Alaska and they have to, live in a different environment, right? So, we have this environment that we live in, and to ask people to live opposite of the environment, right, that's what makes it so challenging. For people to, engage in enough physical activity because we don't move as much. We sit at a desk more. We watch more television and computer screens and phones now that we have going off constantly. So there's more stress. There's a lack of sleep, a lack of focus on sleep. So focus on, you need to be super productive and, work all these hours a day. And then there's the nutrition piece, right? We have a lot of ultra processed food in our environment. And we think, at least from the research that's come out, especially recently, that ultra-processed food is not as healthful for us, say, as unprocessed food, right? So things like fruit and vegetables, things that come from the earth, versus something that's, been processed in a factory and created to make our lives a little bit easier because we needed that, right? Because we didn't have as much time to sort of cook at home or do these things. But that's where we have to, it's a very complicated, interwoven, system. There's not one thing that you're going to change tomorrow, to make it all go away.
Right.
Because it's really been an increase and a rise in the obesity rates to now where, we're predicting that by 2030, over 50% of the U.S. population will have the disease of obesity, which is really where we want to try to, we have been talking at our societies for years, preaching from the mountaintops, although until recently, many people didn't listen, but now more people are listening. So thank you for listening, and thank you for having shows like this so we can really get the word out that this is really something we need to all work on together as a
absolutely.
community.
And you talk about food and the changes in food, and the question is it really even food anymore? Is it all just a chemical equation and a recipe, or is it really food? It's not coming from the earth. Right. You said we didn't have the time, to prepare. We didn't have the time to make the meals. We didn't have the time or the land to grow the food. Life has changed. We're adapting to our environment, and as a result of that, there are all these influences that you're talking about that are impacting our overall health. Our bodies weren't even really designed to process a lot of these chemicals, were they?
Definitely not. I mean, we evolved over millennia, and we've had exposure to these foods for such a short period of time. Our bodies just are not really equipped to handle a lot of the advanced science that has gone into making these foods highly palatable and easily digestible. And so our biology just is vulnerable. And I think that it's not a question of willpower, it's a question of, what can your biology handle? And so I think that the processed foods do have an impact in a big way in that.
Well, that was a very important statement you just made. And we need to talk about that a little bit, because you said it's not willpower.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
That seems to be what everyone gets accused of. You have no willpower, or you need more willpower. And that's something that weighs heavily on people's minds when they are suffering with excess weight and trying to figure out how to manage it. And yet you made a very important statement about that.
Absolutely. And I would say I see this every day in our clinic, patients coming in to learn about surgery and find out if they might be a good candidate. And they'll tell me their dieting history. And my patients are the best dieters in the world. They have more willpower than anybody I've ever met, because they've done it so many times, fighting against their own inherent biology that wants to hold on to weight. So it's not that they're not trying, it's that they've tried, and maybe they've even trained their metabolism to hold on to weight more. We could talk about that. But it's not for lack of willpower. And I would say more attempts at willpower and eating less and moving more and whatever society maybe is recommending is going to be counter to what they're actually trying to achieve.
And we're going to talk about that, because people are constantly trying and then gaining, losing, gaining, this yo-yo dieting phenomenon where people feel the success in losing, but then the real challenge comes in keeping it off.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that that has big influences on their health. How does that impact their body chemistry for the long run? Does it make it harder to lose weight in the future?
Well, the issue is when you lose weight, right? Your body slows down your metabolism to try to save. The weight loss is not normal for the human body. Just like if you and I sat here and had a staring contest, right, to see who would blink first, right? I mean, one of us is going to blink first, right? Because we have to blink to protect our eyes, right? It's just the natural thing so we can't hold that back for very long. Or we can't hold our breath for very long. We can train ourselves to hold our breath a little longer, like certain people, but we can't do it, ongoing, because that's what we do. Is the human body breathes. Mm-hmm. The human body is designed to gain weight, right? To fight back against famine and to not die in the wilderness, and that hasn't changed just because we don't live under those circumstances anymore. So when we lose weight, it lowers our metabolism, but it also changes all these biological hormones that drive us to eat in the other direction, even though we don't want to go back there, right? It's almost like this is that biology that Dr. Doyon was talking about, that takes a hold, right, after you lose weight, and then it makes it harder for you, to keep it off. But then when you gain it back, especially if you lose a significant amount of weight, like greater than 10 or 15, 20% of your weight, which really, when you think about it, is not a lot, not more than people want to lose, right? They're 250 pounds and they might want to lose 50 pounds, which is 20% of their weight. They might do that with some sort of, radical dieting, so to speak. And then what happens though is when they have trouble keeping up with that routine, because you can't just diet, you have to live into a lifestyle that you can carry on ongoing, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you gain it back though, you end up gaining back more fat mass and gaining back less of your muscle mass, your lean mass.
Right.
And then in the end, your metabolism is lower when you gain the weight back. So you're in a deficit now, even though now you're back to 250,
Right.
you have to eat even less in order to lose weight again. So it's like you want to not do that at all. You want to try to lose weight and keep it off in a more sustainable fashion.
Well, that's discouraging to the people who at this point in watching the program have dieted and lost weight and gained it back 5, 6, 7 or more times throughout their lifetime. What do you say to them? Are they primary candidates for some kind of intervention other than just, cutting back and losing the pounds?
Yes,
Yes,
for sure.
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the good news is that there's treatment, both medical and surgical, for a metabolism that is in a disorganized fashion, holding on to weight that it really shouldn't be. So it's a disease state because the body is holding on to more weight than it should be. And it doesn't know that, but it's been trained to do that, perhaps by a variety of conditions, maybe genetic vulnerability, maybe the food industry, maybe repetitive attempts at dieting. And so now you really need some kind of hormonal or surgical combination of treatments to sort of outsmart that dysfunctional metabolism. So you're not going to do it with diet and exercise, just by definition.
And of course, maintaining the weight loss is always the primary objective. People say, oh, I lost all this weight, and they're proud of it, but then not so proud when it comes back. And so maintaining the weight loss is so critical.
Right.
But yet you just said that, their body is fighting against that because it's been a cycle, and now the body is retrained.
Sure.
There's no way to untrain the body or retrain.
Dr. Doyon has ways. We have ways.
We got ways.
We're going to talk
it's
about
called surgery and medication, and also really trying to work on optimizing your lifestyle, not in a way that's we like to talk about. I don't think anybody should be on a diet, right? You should try to live more healthfully within the environment that we're in, right? And try to do that the best you can. And that's what I think we have to get more in line with, instead of this idea of I'm on some sort of diet.
Well, because every day it's like, well, are you on keto? Are you Mediterranean? Are you on, go down the list, and everybody thinks that the one that they're on works the best. You should give up all your carbs. Eat more protein. Those are not necessarily the answers, according. And I guess what I'm hearing you say also about the food industry and and the influences of our environment. Getting back to that for just a moment, I mean, the barrage of ads and commercials every time you're watching anything is all about getting something else gigantic to eat, and that's really tough to deal with. And it tastes good, and it's comforting, and it's social.
Yeah, it's social.
And when you're on a diet, when you've lost weight, there's area in your brain that responds to the sort of enjoyable quality of food, and that area is just really upregulated when you're in this calorie deficit, and your body says, we're starving, we need to get weight back on. So
it makes it even harder.
It makes it even harder.
Have that willpower, so to speak, right, in those settings, because your brain is wired to try to put it back on.
Yeah. So I think that medicine and surgery help to sort of level the playing field in a way, so that the person who's sort of vulnerable to weight gain is now the analogy that I think of is for a person who wants to manage their weight, who's a normal weight. It's sort of like you go up the stairs. There's a little bit of effort, but it's manageable. For somebody who's really saddled with a lot of weight and their metabolism is holding on to it, it's like they're running up an escalator, and it's just, they can keep running, but it's going to keep fighting against them.
Right, that's
it's like analogy. Turning off the escalator.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. They just can walk up normally more.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so good. I'm going to steal that one.
I'll let you steal it. You give me credit.
And yet, how do we overcome the barriers? Because society is not ready to accept, to the degree that it should be, that intervention is necessary. It's how do we get to that point, do you think?
I think partly time is going to be the answer. I mean, I think some of this is just going back to my own medical training. This was not taught. I think most physicians don't really understand obesity pathophysiology, to use the big medical word. They don't understand why weight is a dysfunctional condition, and even physicians still think that you just need to eat less and move more, right? So I think it's partly just lack of knowledge, to be honest, and that has trickled down from the top. And I think hopefully as time goes by, and I think one of the great thing about the medications is they really highlight that this is a biologic process, and hopefully people are starting to understand this a bit more, because it's true. You're absolutely right. There's just a massive amount of stigma to overcome.
So the GLP-1 injectable medications that have become so popular, they're not really new though, are they? No. I remember you saying it when we last met. They've been around.
Ago, yeah.
So why now?
Not the newer ones, because the newer ones are much better. Obviously, science gets better over time, typically. I mean, that's what science is, or why it exists, right? To get better over time. But we've had the medications, these types of medications for 20 years now. Mostly for the treatment of diabetes, and then we also recognized that they were helpful for weight management as well. In fact, the story typically goes that these were diabetes drugs that then got repurposed, into weight loss. But actually, there was science around weight loss in the very beginning. So, but there was no, back then, there was no market for weight loss. I mean, there was no, again, people didn't think of obesity as a disease. There was no coverage by insurance. And so you couldn't make a drug for weight loss, 20 years ago very successfully, because you wouldn't sell it. Because unless you sold it for cash. But but now that we have much more acceptance of the disease of obesity, there's been much more focus towards creating treatments, right? Because there is more of a focus, as you mentioned. I mean, with time, we are learning that there are newer treatments and newer options out there for patients. And the beauty of it comes from, a lot of it was when, it came from the fact that when surgery, because surgery has been around for, I don't know, 1950s or something, long time, right? And they recognize that when you do surgery, it gives you your own GLP-1. Like you get high levels of GLP-1 with the surgery. So, I mean, I tell patients all the time, if you have surgery, it's like getting Ozempic for free.
I don't
have surgery.
I don't understand that.
You get lots of
your insurance company.
Are you saying that because the surgery changes your hormones?
Yes. So that's part of, so surgery is not just this restrictive, we're going to make your stomach smaller, we're going to change the hormones. So it's called metabolic surgery in many contexts. You'll see that term. American Society of Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery is the main surgical society, because we're really changing metabolism.
By doing the surgery, you're changing?
Yes,
is
by
that
doing
just
surgery.
A natural side effect of the surgery?
It's a consequence of where food is traveling through the GI tract. There are receptors on different areas of the GI tract. So if you keep food out of those areas, you change signaling that happens during a meal that tends to make people more insulin sensitive, less insulin resistant, and better able to process food, and less storage and more use.
That's a new one for me.
Utilization.
I always thought it was about storage.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about it's really internal communications in your body through
Changes
hormones.
your biology. It's biologic surgery, right? And we've known that for years, and trying to convince patients of that has been challenging. Yeah. I think it's going to be easier now, so to speak, because of the fact that we have more of these medications available that do the same thing, right? And so you can now explain it easier to patients that, hey, what you're feeling right now with the medication is what you would get with surgery, only even more, because surgery also gives you a smaller stomach size. So, it is also restrictive, in addition to being biological, right? If I'm taking medication, for my obesity, I can a lot of times I still have a normal sized stomach. So,
there's a volume.
I can still put a little more in there than a patient maybe that's having surgery, for example.
That's amazing. So when we come back, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more in specific detail about the surgeries and some of these medications. So we will be right back.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
We are back, and right before the break, we were talking about some very interesting ways in which your body changes as a result of surgery, and your whole hormonal processes and the communications in your body changes, and it has a huge impact on your body's ability to maintain a better weight, lose weight in the future, getting over some of the maybe damage that's been done in the past. So we're going to go into a lot more detail on that now. And I don't want to paraphrase incorrectly, so correct me if I'm wrong, but
Sure.
that sounds so different than what I ever expected about surgery. I always thought it was a space,
just restrictive.
just restrictive.
Yeah.
So you eat less food.
Eat
Yeah.
less food, yes. And then I always questioned, would you really want that for life, to have this tiny little stomach? What if you
Yeah.
really wanted to have a bigger meal,
right.
and then you had that tiny little stomach? Would you still be able to have a bigger meal, or
Yeah.
would that be the end of that for the rest of your life?
Sure.
How do you answer that?
Yeah, so there's definitely some sort of natural stretch that
Sure.
happens over time, right after surgery, in the weeks and months after surgery. That feeling of satiety or fullness is very acute, and just even a couple of bites feel too filling. And that fades, which is good, because we don't want to live our lives that way. I want people to feel some little bit of natural hunger and eat and have that feel satisfied and sort of be as normal as possible, basically. And so the volume restriction is definitely a component. They're always going to feel fuller with a smaller portion of food, which I think is obviously helpful. But there are so many other ways that the surgery works by changing the hormonal kind of atmosphere of what's going on in the GI tract, changes some of the microbiome of the bacteria in the gut. It changes some of the bile salts that also end up affecting messaging in the GI tract. So we could probably do like a whole lecture on the ways that surgery works.
The microbiome is like
Yeah.
something everybody's talking about
Everybody's
these days,
interested in
because it has an impact on diverticulitis and all these other digestive diseases, and everybody's trying to get their microbiome a little more balanced and aligned.
So I think you can think of surgery as this sort of multi-layered, kind of internally redundant system, and because there's so many ways that weight is helped by it, it ends up being very strong because of that. And it's not just one pathway in the body, it's multiple different pathways.
But the surgery, like whether it's a bypass or a sleeve or what, there are several others.
Sure.
The surgery hasn't changed though over the years, has it?
Yeah, I mean, the surgery's definitely evolved in a pretty major way. So back in the, pre-1950s, there was something called a jejunal ileal bypass, which is no longer done because those patients all died of liver failure, or it was reversed. So there's definitely the bad old days of surgery that we don't do anymore. And then in the early 90s, there was a major revolution where surgeries were no longer done with a big cut. They started being done laparoscopically. So small incisions, much safer, lower risk infection, lower risk of hernias, easier to recover from, obviously. And so that was another tremendous leap for surgery. And additionally, there are types of surgeries that some have sort of faded into the background and we don't do anymore, like a lap band, the adjustable gastric band. That's very sort of outdated. It's still FDA approved technically, but it's not really performed with much frequency. It makes up less than 1% of surgeries done in the US nowadays. And then there's another surgery called a sleeve gastrectomy, which didn't exist, back in the 80s and 90s, but has been done in significant numbers since the mid-2010s, I would say. And it now is the most popular surgery that's done with the greatest frequency. Gastric bypass still exists. That number has declined as the sleeve has become more prevalent. And so I think, the landscape of surgeries that are offered will probably continue to evolve over time. And that's part of, what that consultation with your surgeon at your first visit is. What are your inherent medical conditions? What surgery is sort of the right fit for you? Because they all have sort of different advantages and disadvantages.
Well, when you talk about the fact that people way back when
Yeah.
died of, liver failure
Yeah.
from some surgery,
Yeah.
and now it's evolved.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what will be discovered in the future, and
Sure.
will you regret your choice now because something better is coming? So how do you deal with that?
I think that, in the 1950s, we didn't have anything close to what we have now in terms of oversight. Right now, there's, major surgical societies that have U.S. and global impact. There are centers of excellence that get their designation from every 3-year review of the quality of the outcomes. This is a time where, thanks to the internet and the ability to share technology within the members of the field, I think that the safety has really benefited from that. And nowadays, metabolic bariatric surgery is quoted as having less risk of death, say, than having your gallbladder removed or having a hip replacement.
What?
Yes.
And
so
having a gallbladder removed is such
like
a
something
basic
that
thing
nobody
that nobody
thinks
even
about.
thinks about.
Nobody thinks
Right.
about it being risky. And so I think because of the bad old days of surgery where there was a lot of risk in the early days of the learning curve of laparoscopy in the early 90s, that led to just major societal overview of these types of surgeries, and to make sure that people are adhering to really consistent quality outcomes. So we've definitely learned from our past and made major changes. It's sort of, I think, akin to like the airline industry, where there was major problems, and that led to a massive overhaul, and it's really elevated the safety in a tremendous way.
Yeah, I know, she's full of them. I love it.
How many years?
I think a lot about this stuff. I don't know. I'm kind of a nerd.
I know that's what you said, Audrey. It's also this bias and stigma, right? People come in and they'll say, well, I don't want surgery.
Right.
And I'll be like, well, would you say that if I came in and told you had breast cancer?
Right.
And that was the best treatment for you, to survive, right? Most people would not say that. I mean, they don't want breast cancer in the first place. They don't want to have surgery for breast cancer. No one wants that. But they do it because they know it's the best treatment.
Right.
Right. And that's what we've had, that bias that we can still just do this by this diet or this thing out there. Right. We've still had this this misconception that we're somehow failing ourselves because we can't do this ourselves.
Like, I've heard patients say explicitly almost that, I told myself I would never have the surgery, as if to admit defeat, that they had failed in some way. And it's just heartbreaking
awful
to hear that.
And same with hearing people say, they're not telling their family or friends that they're taking medication.
Right.
Again, we not that we need to tell everybody that what we're doing in our personal, medical history, but oftentimes, we're talking about taking a medicine for our cholesterol or for our blood pressure, things like that. But we're still in this societal time right now where people are like really, still questioning the idea that this is a disease that's worthy of treatment.
Right.
And part of that is put upon us by society too. The fact that Medicare doesn't cover the medication option. At least they do cover surgery, which is quite great. The surgeons have done a great job of getting Medicare to do that over the years. But I think that's really that's really the thing we have to overcome, is this bias and stigma in the world that this is
It's huge. It's going to take a generation because most things do. And when you have to change a mindset, and when you have people saying, I told myself I'd never have the surgery, or I'm not going to tell my family I'm taking the medication, it's because they feel that they're supposed to be able to do it on their own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it's a feeling or an expression of defeat.
Yeah.
And that's unnecessary.
No.
But it's not well known that it's unnecessary because it's not recognized as a disease.
Right.
And yet it's an epidemic. When else has there been an epidemic that hasn't been recognized as a disease?
Yeah.
Well, it's recognized, right, by the American Medical Association in 2013, said obesity is a disease. As Dr. Doyon said, it's a dysfunctional storage of fat. It's dysfunctional, meaning you're not wanting it to happen, right? And your body is dysfunctional in some way in which it's creating an adverse effect on your health, right? And that's what's happening. And so we've known it. We just have to get to the point where we, accept it truly, right? And that's what, we did that with, I liken it to, mental health was the same way. 20 years ago when SSRIs first came out, these are the drug treatment that was much more effective at treating depression or anxiety, versus our older drugs were much more harder to manage. But now, you had a more effective treatment that was easier to tolerate. And then again, in the beginning, people didn't talk about, it was kind of taboo to talk about your mental illness. Now it's like kind of, like trendy to talk about what therapist you have or what therapy you're doing, or, I mean,
what
not
medication
that, just not that we, are making it light of it or anything, 'cause it's a very serious illness, mental illness as well, right? Very similar in nature, but it did take that sort of, like you mentioned, right? It took that decade or so for people to be more, more accepting that this is a disease process that I need help with from a team of caring clinicians, and not from something on the internet.
Exactly.
And we want to get that across, that this is about having a longitudinal team that's going to take care of you. Some of that now today is delivered via telemedicine and the internet, but we just don't want people filling out a form or buying something, that they don't know is high quality treatment. Just to try to get access to treatment, because we're seeing that now too, unfortunately.
How are you seeing that?
Well, there's much more focus on the medication, and because so many people in the country don't have coverage for the medication, and then so many insurances are not covering the medication because of the cost, because there is a real cost issue that we have at hand. That now, people are turning to sources of these medications that are purely just even sort of, buying them off the internet, to be honest, and that is available now because of some loopholes in our government. The way we have some of our legislation set up, and that's what that's really I caution people against doing that, because
yes, I've recently heard of compounding offerings of the drug. I don't know the right terminology for it, but I would think that would come with some risks.
Yeah, the issue is that it's perfectly legal to compound a pharmaceutical when it is generic, right? Meaning, it's been on the market for a long time and you need a special version, right? Or Audrey, you need a special version because you're allergic to some of the dye that's in the commercial version.
So that means a pharmacy will make it specially for you,
for
based on your needs.
One person or 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. Now we're talking about upwards of 2 million people now that are taking medication like this. The issue is that the concern that we have in our societies is that the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the starting process, not the compounding so much, because that's the act of mixing an active pharmaceutical ingredient together to give it to a patient, right? That part is regulated, the mixing part is regulated by states in the United States. But the active pharmaceutical ingredient, that is, a proprietary patented type of drug. And it's able to be made right now because there's a shortage. So there is a market to compound the medication because there's 140 million people that need treatment in our country. And we have a law that says if there's a drug in shortage, people can compound it even though it's not generic. Okay, even though it's a brand name.
But how do they know how to compound it? They don't have the recipe, so to speak, the formula.
Well, people have the molecule is known. The molecule, when you produce a molecule, you have to get it approved by the FDA. These large pharmaceutical companies have done this research. Bringing Ozempic, semaglutide, which is Ozempic or Wegovy, or bringing tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro or Zepbound, bringing those to market took 10, 15 years and millions and tens of millions of dollars, to do clinical trials and prove that they're safe and prove that they're effective. And so there was a lot of money spent, hundreds of millions of money, spent to develop these pharmaceuticals over the years. And now to think that somebody over in some other country just takes the molecule, right? They know what the molecule looks like and they figure out how to make it. They're smart people, that are able to do chemistry, right? So they have figured out how to make it, right? And because there's a market in the US for the compounding piece, and we have so many people that don't have coverage, these compounding companies are buying this active pharmaceutical ingredient, but this is not what the active pharmaceutical ingredient is. Not the same thing you're getting from the company that made it from scratch, that has the ability, that developed it and researched it, and they had a process to make it, right? That process is intellectual property. It's secret. You don't know what their process is. You know what the end molecule looks like.
I would think that would be risky.
That's the thing we worry about, because it could have less activity.
And if it hasn't gone through the clinical trials and if it hasn't gotten the FDA approval, then you don't really know what you're taking.
That's the issue we have at hand. And we've seen many patients that they think they're on a certain dose, or they're told they're on a certain dose, because that's the dose that is being ordered even by a physician, let's say from a compounding pharmacy. And, I had a patient who was supposedly taking 1.5 milligrams of semaglutide. So we put her on 1.7 of the actual drug because she had coverage for it, right? She had coverage for the medication. She didn't know she had coverage for the medication.
Oh.
She was taking, paying $400 for something that, was supposedly helping her. But she had coverage, right? And she took the real stuff, so to speak, the prescription brand stuff at 1.7 and started throwing up. Because clearly she was not taking 1.5.
Clearly she was not a 1.5.
Interesting.
I mean, to go from 1.5 to 1.7 is barely a minimal type of increase.
And I think what I'm
There's no
observing from this, yes, is also the fact that she was doing it under your supervision. So, meaning the new dose.
The new
one.
So, if she had been doing that on her own, she would have never discovered that.
Right.
And so that really
she would have never discovered that what she was taking was really not very effective for her, right? I mean, it wasn't really the right dose of medicine that she was getting because it's completely, it's not, there's nothing to, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has rules and regulations that all of our drug companies, pharmaceutical companies have to go through in order to get approval for these medicines for a reason, to make them safe.
What makes it so hard for the companies to keep up with the demand?
There's 140 million people alone in the United States. These are worldwide drugs being used across the world to treat diabetes and obesity. That's 140 million Americans alone. That's, doesn't account for the rest of the world. And there just is not the ability. I mean, it's hard to make drugs. It's not like, I mean, despite the fact that some people are potentially whipping them up in their basement. But I mean, it's challenging to make pharmaceuticals, right? They're not something you can just, sort of mastermind in large quantities very quickly. You have to invest, right, multiple millions of dollars into production facilities, which is what they're doing now.
The quality control, right?
Quality control is huge. And, there's no quality control over I shouldn't say no, there's some quality control in the sense that compounders have to follow regulations and state regulations, right? But at the same time, there's just so much risk there that we just think the risk is way too great for people to sort of take on.
If some of the benefits of the medication accomplishes what you could potentially accomplish with surgery to some degree, why would you choose surgery as opposed to the medication?
I think much of it comes down to, so some of it comes down to patient preference, and we can circle back to that. Sometimes it comes down to just who can qualify for surgery. So this is an insurance-based NIH guideline from 1991, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so for people who have a BMI over 40, they could be considered a candidate for surgery, or over 35, BMI over 35 plus a serious weight-related condition such as diabetes, high blood pressure, sleep apnea. That's like the standard kind of original indications. Because surgery's really advanced from 1991, when the patients that were being looked at in those trials had either open gastric bypass or lap bands, neither of which we really do anymore. So 2 years ago, the two major global and US societies that kind of watch over quality of this type of surgery are recommending new guidelines to say it should be BMI 35 plus, no matter what, and 30 and above. That's sort of the, with the medical condition. So some of this is who can qualify for surgery. So if they can't qualify for surgery, fortunately, there's still medication that could be a great backup option. Sometimes it's a patient preference. I think that both of us would agree that because the amount of patient participation in terms of how they do with their weight management really affects the outcomes. So if the patient's really invested and they really want to do surgery, they really want to do medication, they're going to do better than if they're kind of forced into the, square peg into a round hole. And then I think some patients have come to me saying, they were nervous about the medication because it hasn't been around that long at this specific dose in this period of time, which we just don't know yet. I can't really say anything. Or maybe they had a side effect from the medication, or
that's a big one.
Or
side
they,
Well, I had a patient the other day that has having some side effects and some worries, about recurrent side effects. And I'm like, well, you should really, have surgery. There's not, you
Yeah.
don't have that long-term side effect
Yeah.
of medication,
Yeah.
that you have to deal with.
So after surgery, you're not on medication.
Well, that's a good topic.
Yeah, not usually. So you could be, though. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about this field. I think that something you may not know, but in the world of medical training and residency, there's this sort of medicine versus surgery loggerheads
I
kind of
didn't know
cultural
that.
thing.
Yes.
But this field is really cool because the medicine and the surgery people work together so nicely. So there are going to be some patients who need more treatment after surgery, and it's hard to quantify exactly what number that is because the way it's described in studies is really haphazard, and so we don't have good, solid data, but it's probably somewhere on the range of like 15, maybe 20% of patients will need additional treatment after surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to go back to how do we define failure, how do we define a disease, it's not like the surgery has failed them perhaps, but maybe their biology is just really resistant and they need more treatment. It's kind of like if you had high blood pressure and you were on a medication and then you needed a second medication, you haven't failed, the medication hasn't failed, you just have really stubborn high blood pressure. So
One
some
of my
people,
guests who was on the first episode of this topic had the sleeve
The gentleman,
surgery,
yep.
and then he
subsequently is on
ended up
medication.
on being on medication.
Absolutely.
'Cause it's
So
a
it's not
chronic
wrong.
disease,
It's a chronic, progressive, relapsing disease.
Right.
So some people just need more treatment.
You're going to have potentially your whole life, which is
Right.
why you need a care team that's going to
Yes.
take care of you in that manner, because you need to think about it as a lifelong journey. It doesn't just go away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, because weight gain happens, right?
Yeah.
And we said, biologically, we're designed to gain weight.
Yeah.
Even after surgery, we're designed to gain it back.
Yeah.
And so we need to keep in a continual process of reassessing ourselves, just like we
Yes.
would with our blood pressure,
Yeah.
checking it to make sure it's in line, right? Because it's not cured,
Yeah.
right? It's something that we have to continually make sure that we're keeping track of and not let the weight gain come
Right.
back on, right? And so many patients I have that have had surgery and they gained weight back, and then they come in, they go, I thought you were going to yell at me because I
Yes.
gained the weight back. And I
Oh.
feel like I failed myself because
Yes.
I had the surgery and I let the weight come back on as if it was like their fault.
Yeah,
But
totally.
it's not.
I
right?
know this. I feel terrible when people say this, Dr. Doyon. I was afraid to come see you because I was afraid you'd be mad that I gained weight. Why would I be mad about the condition I'm treating you for? It makes no sense. And so I think that some of the weight regain worries that we have after surgery, maybe it's because the patient's not seeking help, right? And so if they just came in at the first 15 pounds, it'd probably be a lot different than if they waited until
50 pounds,
50
that's
pounds or
regain
more.
something else,
Right. So I think always wanting to encourage, just like Dr. Fitch is saying, a lifelong relationship, ongoing care. That's what I want. And if it's not something that we can manage with surgery or a revision, or they don't want that, then medication is there for them. It's a little bit like a game of weight is like managing a game of whack-a-mole. It's like, is the sleep good? Is the nutrition good? Is your anatomy good? Do we need to play with the
Another
hormones?
analogy.
Another good one.
Right? You just kind of need to what is the thing that needs management? And
I like to think of it a little more scientific than whack. No,
yeah, we're doing whack-a-mole.
Well,
Angela.
I'm pretty good. I was pretty good,
Really good at it, right?
Which is why I probably would.
This is probably where, yeah,
I think
exactly.
it comes down to, though, another common thread between what you're both doing in your practices, and that is the whole health care
Yeah.
around
Focus.
obesity,
Yeah.
or inclusive of
Yeah.
obesity and weight
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
So
And
let's
it's not your fault, right? That's the
Yeah.
bigger thing we want to get across. And there are treatment options, just like there are treatment options for lots of diseases. You may have heart disease and have a cath, you don't have a stent placed, but need open heart surgery later, or you need a medication, right, in the long run. And that's common of diseases, and we just need to start to think about that for obesity as well, and utilize all the tools in the toolbox and not think of them as bad or good, or, and recognize that if you're doing something, if you're on medication for weight management and it helps you to lose weight, you have to stay on that medication. There's another misconceived notion that people can stop their medication and not gain it back. And that's what we need to really focus on is most people, there may be some people, but they're very unique and very small percentage, most people need to stay on the medication to continue to maintain the weight loss.
That's important. Just like you would your heart medication or thyroid or or cholesterol medication.
But we think about it differently because it's this disease that we think is not, is just fixable.
Disease, but not a disease.
Yeah. And it's still just if we just were acting better, if I was just behaving better, I would be able to control it, is the way we feel about it. And that's the challenge that we have to get past.
You mentioned a few times that the qualifier for some treatment is BMI. Is that really a reliable qualifier? Because I hear about visceral fat, and I hear about, skinny fat.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about people who are skinny fat. They're skinny, but yet their fat content is very high.
Yeah.
What is BMI the right?
It's probably not the ultimate best, most precise, but it's readily measured with very basic tools in the office.
Calculator.
A scale and a measuring tape. That's your test, right? So if you think about what's the expense of a medical test, is it justified? I think we're not going to be able to subject everybody to a DEXA scan. It's just not possible.
A what scan?
It's body composition.
Body composition
right,
scan.
That's
although ultimately I would think that would be the best thing to do.
Yeah, insurance is not going to cover it.
I think we'll move towards that, but like you said, it's going to take another decade. Because we're getting much more reliable ways of doing it that are, we have a pretty good bioimpedance device, which is an electrical device that measures your content of your fat and muscles, et cetera, to tell you exactly. But BMI does correlate pretty well.
Yeah.
I think the bigger problem is some of these rules and regulations, the insurance, because they're using finite numbers. And medicine's not if I'm seeing you in the office and you have certain characteristics, I should be able to kind of, make sure those numbers fit you, right, as a patient. And that's what's so hard, because they have to have
I wonder if
numbers.
they're also, the insurance may not understand yet how not permitting coverage for certain weight-related treatment will save them money on other treatments, whether it be heart disease or diabetes.
This is the problem. And
this is the problem.
This is what we argue too, is other diseases don't have to show that. We just treat them.
Right.
So you don't have to show that cancer treatment is worthwhile, meaning financially.
Right.
That the
For the
added
insurer.
life, to the insurer, right? You don't say, okay, if we treat this person with this cancer, they're going to live 5 more years. Is that cost effective? That's and the treatment might be very, very expensive, right? But we do that because we think it's the right thing to do. Because we have the treatment available and it's important to the patient, right?
Right.
And that's very similar with obesity, but yet the insurances are saying, you have to prove it to us that it's worthwhile.
Right. And this is despite, at least in the history of bariatric surgery, where we've had just a massive amount of really high quality data showing that so many disease states either are significantly reduced or go completely into remission. Diabetes, high blood pressure, sleep apnea. There was a major trial out of, I can't remember, it was Mayo or Cleveland Clinic, showing reduction of cancer risk by 30% and reduction of mortality by 50% from cancer, increased longevity by something like 7 to 14 years, depending on how.
Through.
So it's like we know that surgery not just improves body composition, how people feel and their confidence and all those wonderful non-scale victory things that we want, but it also improves their health, and it reduces
longevity.
It reduces serious illnesses. And it increases longevity. So,
with obesity being so closely tied to so many other illnesses, you would think it would open up the door and open up people's eyes in the decision-making positions at the top of the insurance industry. Yeah. But I imagine that both of you, through the work you do with the organizations where you have your leadership roles and you are influencing some of that around the country.
We're trying. We've been trying for a long time, but we'll keep trying. The Obesity Medicine Association was founded in 1950. So we've been fighting obesity for a long time, despite the fact that it just now became kind of trendy and everybody wants a piece of it. But, we're here. We've been educating clinicians, educating people. We're thankful that you are educating people now, Audrey, on this important topic, because I think the more education people get, the more they understand it, the more that they can make, you know, more decisions about their own health and well-being.
Now, the Obesity Action Coalition
Yeah.
is working on legislation. Is that something that you're both involved with in some way, or either of you involved with?
Yeah, the Obesity Action Coalition actually is the patient advocacy arm. So everybody who's a patient out there, I mean, anybody who has obesity or wants to support a loved one, you know, who has obesity.
So this is a great way for the public to
join.
get involved.
Yes, it's
yes.
in fact, we're having the Obesity Action Coalition is having a regional event here in Boston at a hotel. I think. Down by the airport somewhere in that region.
Well, I'm going to put the
And-
website up so that people can go to the website.
Yeah, so it's a free event where there'll be speakers on these topics and ability to answer questions.
Wonderful.
And, they're having these regional events across the country to try to generate awareness and support, to let people know that they're there to help support people with obesity. They fight for things like coverage for surgery, like coverage for medication, you know, access to equitable job work environments, you know, non-discrimination for obesity. People have been discriminated against in workplaces, you know, for having obesity.
Exactly.
So they fight for all these, you know, the holistic pieces of it all, not just, you know, to get coverage or get treatment for medication, et cetera.
Do you think that industries that have negative influences on diet and consumption will at any time be partners in this, or will be held accountable, like the tobacco industry was for cancer related to smoking?
Well, I think it's hard because it's hard to put one thing on it, right? It's not McDonald's fault or, you know,
Right.
Any
you know,
one company.
Yeah, you know, it's not any one person's, you know, fault, right? But I do think most of them do support initiatives that try to help make it better, you know, that try to help give back to communities in terms of some way, shape, or form, you know, in order to, you know, help to try to mitigate some of that. And I think, you know, there's a lot of work being done on positive things too, you know, newer sort of advancements in food delivery that are more healthful, right? I mean, people trying to make things more healthful in some way, shape, or form. You know, so I think, you know, the issue is that some of that I think will change because of these changes that are happening.
What I'd like to do is just take a moment to give each of you a chance to talk about, you know, your particular practice and, you know, what you want people to know about how, you know, you work and, you know, what they should be looking for when they look for treatment. So, you know, let's take some time to do that for each of you.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think, you know, looking for someone who's caring and compassionate and knows what they're, you know, what they're doing, right? I mean, looking for a clinician who is, you know, is going to be able to help them longitudinally is hugely important, you know, versus maybe potentially, you know, we've been used to getting some of these services because they aren't covered by insurance just out in the marketplace. And I think, you know, just making sure that you're aligned with, even if you are getting some services out in the marketplace, make sure your doctor that you have, your primary care doctor or somebody is also helping you manage this disease, you know, in the long run.
And knows how to.
Because
right? You can't just assume that all doctors do.
Right, and that's the thing. And if you get, you know, I encourage patients, I had a patient the other day that, or at one of these OAC events I was doing, a person there at the event came up and said, well, my doctor won't, you know, talk to me about these medications because, you know, they just tell me to eat less and exercise more. And I push back a little. I say, hey, well, why don't you tell them you went to this event? And, you know, because I think we all have to educate each other, right? And not feel, and if you talk to somebody about it and say, hey, I heard about this or I read about this and I heard, you know, this show, I heard on Audrey Hall show, I heard these two doctors talking about this, you know, say that, right? And if that person's not willing to listen to that, then you probably should find somebody else.
Good
because
advice.
You need somebody who's going to really listen and give you the treatment options, you know, in a shared decision-making discussion of the risks and benefits of those options, and then be able to provide those to you, you know, in a manner that hopefully is proven to be safe and effective. You know, and that I think is the key, that people aren't just trying to sell you something, right? Because there is that too that's happening, unfortunately.
And Knownwell and Needham, you've been there now for what, a year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half, yep.
And we'll put the information up as well, so if people want to reach out, they can do that.
I just want to say one other thing about Angela, Dr. Fitch's practice. She's probably too humble to toot her own horn, but I think because that longitudinal practice and that holistic care, because in her practice with the background as a general practitioner, able to understand patients' other medical conditions and how that might interact and overlap with obesity and what medications might potentially have a dual benefit. I think that's also fantastic about the way Dr. Fitch practices. So.
Thank you.
Yes, and to talk about my practice, I have a longitudinal, lifelong relationship with patients, and they might say, post-op, they might say, Dr. Doyon, am I done seeing you? Or like, nope, you're stuck with me for life. So I like to meet patients at their first visit. I think some practices have the patients meet with, say, an advanced practice provider, such as a nurse practitioner, just because of efficiency of the practice. But I like to meet the patient from the get-go. I like to know really their whole relevant medical history so that I can understand if there's any overlapping condition that might have an effect on which surgery we choose, or medications that might be a problem for certain surgeries, or any surgical history that I need to know about so that I can plan a proper operation. And then make sure that I understand, what they're looking for. What is it about your weight history and why surgery? And I want to make sure that it feels like a good fit for them, and that, we're not just doing surgery to do surgery, and that's the right operation for this patient. And then they go through a comprehensive evaluation and really educational process with a dietitian. They see a behavioral health. We do some background studies to check and make sure that they're ready for surgery. We'll follow up. We will review everything, give lots of opportunities to answer questions. There's always some built-in education.
And it's a relationship, as you were saying. You build a relationship, and
Absolutely.
It's a long-term relationship.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll put some information up as well for Emerson and for getting in touch with you through the program.
Fabulous.
I want to thank you both for joining me today. It's been very, very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Dr. Fitch and Dr. Doyon took the time today to go in depth and shared their expertise as specialists dedicated to treating obesity, which the Center for Disease Control calls a national epidemic. 71% of Americans are overweight, with nearly 40% falling into the obese category. In addition to medical treatment, a key requirement for success, though, is to be committed to the work involved with the weight loss journey and the lifestyle changes necessary to maintain the weight loss. With their help, with your doctor's help, and always talk to your doctor for professional advice before you take any medications or pursue any treatment for weight loss. There are possible risks and side effects to be aware of. There's no magic procedure or magic medication, but with commitment to the process of choice and the necessary lifestyle changes, obesity can be successfully treated. Thank you so much for tuning into the Audrey Hall Show, where you will always learn something new.